Hi, and welcome to the Sunday Lunch Project podcast for the 31st of July, 2019. This is your host, Nigel Creaser. This month, the Sunday Lunch Project manager meets Dr. David Hillson, the Risk Doctor. But first, a word from our sponsors. This month, we're sponsored by my summer sale of books. Remember, when I was a project manager, it's permanent free, gratis, for nout, zilch, zero. So grab a copy of that one. The second, a Kindle version of my second book, Project Management, The Sketches, is now available for the whole month of August for £1.99 in the UK and similarly at low price across the globe. So jump and grab a copy there. Take a look in the show notes and you'll find all the details. In news, I bit the bullet and I went through and getting all of the resolution sorted out for each of the screenshots for the Alexa book I'm doing. I've gone through another edit of that and discovered that I seem to have trouble writing your and you in the right place, mixing them up indiscriminately, which is quite frustrating because it's quite hard to see them when you're going through and editing your own work on something like that. But hopefully that now is done. I've been through today, uploaded the 14th version as it's numbered up onto KDP. I'll be looking at the formatting and doing a final pass through. And then I'm hoping to make that available in August, certainly for the Kindle is my plan, maybe September. But then the paperback, I've got to do the cover design and things like that for the paperback, which can take a little bit of time because it's a bit fiddly. Because the formatting of the number of pages it's going to come out at is the thing I have to do first. Formatting can be quite awkward as well. But hopefully that will be out in August and September. So that will be another one out and there. I probably haven't mentioned on the podcast, it's called Boost Your Brand with Alexa and WordPress. So it's aimed at people, small to medium businesses looking to take their first steps in using the Alexa ecosystem. So that's the book. Podcasts, I now have 11 podcasts in the bag, with the final one confirmed for a week on Friday. So that will give me my whole 12 podcasts ready for the year. Just to let you know the up-and-coming ones. Next month, we got Patti Mclaughlin. Great interview, talking to her about her journey to getting the PGMP. That's the PMI's Program Management Qualification. Fantastic interview. Again, another brilliant one with Joe Puzz of Project Management Office Hours, otherwise known as PMO Joe. He has a really interesting story about and an incredible passion about project management and some work that he's been doing with veterans in the US. And in October, I see Mike Clayton, the online PM course guy, again, a long-term project management person, passionate about the subject, passionate about teaching people. So those, I expect you'll be really looking forward to having a listen to those. In addition to that, I have also added each of those podcasts, the first 6, are now available on YouTube. And so the middle of each month following the standard podcast release, I'm going to release it on YouTube. It takes a little bit more fiddling to get the video element of it working. Had a couple of subscribers on there. I wasn't aware that people used YouTube as a podcast listening platform. And so I've decided to make that available to people. So actually, if you are listening to this and you are someone who prefers to listen to podcasts on YouTube, pop across and subscribe. The other element to do with the podcast is that I may start adding some additional episodes each month as a middle of month item that isn't going to follow the normal format. One of the examples is I've been chatting to someone who is a speed reading expert and potentially how that could apply to project management, but it's not going to be the traditional interview that I do around people's background. It's going to be more around the tools and techniques. So just looking into that at the moment. It's quite time-consuming, pulling together, organising or editing the podcast. So I'll have to judge on whether I can devote the time that way. So that's all to do with podcasting. And I suppose the other thing to mention on that, I haven't got finalised it, but of the 11 interviews that I have done, every single one of the interviewees has said they're quite happy for me to transcribe the interviews into a book. Now, you are obviously a podcast listener, but some people out there may not listen to podcasts. And so each of the interviews will be available in a book called Project Management, the Interviews 2019. And that I will start editing when I've got all 12 and do that ready for, really, I want to try and get it ready for Christmas, before the new year, certainly. Christmas would be ideal, because then you can buy it all for presents for friends and colleagues who don't like podcasts. Finally, on the subject of books, I'm currently reading the Project book from last month's interview guest, Colin D. Ellis. It's a great book, really enjoying it. It covers the fundamentals of project management, and it's like in easy, digestible chapters, and I'd heartily recommend it. Just grab a copy of it and fire through it. Colin's entertaining manner and knowledge is just fantastic. And that's it. Well, hopefully you enjoy the interview today with Dr. David Hillson, and I'll speak to you after the interview. Today, I'd like to welcome to the Sunday Lunch Project podcast, Dr. David Hillson, the Risk Doctor. He's an international thought leader in risk management with a global reputation as an excellent speaker and an award-winning author. Countless individuals, teams, and organizations have benefited from his blend of innovative insights with practical application presented in an accessible style that combines clarity with humor. He also shares his insights regularly through books, papers, and articles, as well as a regular series of Risk Doctor Briefings. David's speaking and writing is guided by the Risk Doctor motto of understand profoundly so you can explain simply. And David has been active and tireless advocate of risk management over three decades. His many contributions have moved the risk discipline forward in both thinking and practice, ranging from the inclusion of opportunities in the risk process to groundbreaking work on risk attitudes and risk appetite. He's developed the risk breakdown structure to provide a framework for risk processes, risk meta-language to ensure accurate risk descriptions, defined response strategies for focusing actions, maturity model frameworks for benchmarking and risk management capability, and criteria for defining a professional approach to risk management, the Risk Management Professionalism Manifesto. He's been recognized for a range of awards, and I take a big breath here, including PMI David I. Cleland PM Literature Award, PMI Eric Jennett Project Management Excellence Award, CMI Chartered Fellow Award, IRM Risk Personality of the Year Award, Project Management Institute Fellow Award, Honorary Fellow of the Association for Project Management, RSA Fellow, National PM Association of Taiwan Honorary Advisory in Risk, Fellow of the Institute of Risk Management, PMI Distinguished Contribution Award, PMI European Congress Palme d'Or Award for Best Paper, and PMI Risk SIG Significant Contribution Award. And breathe. Welcome to the show, David.
Wow, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here, Nigel, and I hadn't realised I'd done so much. It's all been real fun.
Yeah, and I'm guessing you know something about risk.
Well, that's all I know. I'm afraid I'm a very boring person, really. But, you know, risk management is really exciting and real fun. So it's not such a bad thing to be an expert in.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. So I'd like to find out a bit about behind the background of what makes David Hillson, the Risk Doctor, tick. So going right back to the beginning, when I imagine there were some risk management strategies applied at the birth of David Hillson. Where was that and what happened there?
Yes, the 6th floor of University College Hospital in Tottenham Court Road in London, yes. And I was born at an early age. I wanted to be close to my mother while she was in hospital, all those usual corny jokes. 1955, when I was born, I was nameless because my parents had decided that I was going to be Martin when I was born. They took one look at me and my mother said, "He's not a Martin." And then they had to sort of rethink everything. So David came a couple of days later, and I'm quite glad about that.
Yeah. Well, you get used to your name, don't you, as well? So where is it you're living now? Are you still in the London area, or?
No, I was born in North London, so I'm a Spurs fan. So that's
right.
a good thing. Sorry about that to all the other. You have to make your choices early on. I coming home from school at about the age of 8, I met a group of boys on the corner of a street who blocked my path and said, "So, Spurs or Arsenal?" And I knew one of the answers was wrong. I didn't know which one. So I just picked the first one and I said Spurs. And I got beaten up and chased up the road. So I felt after that early start, I ought to be committed to Spurs. And so I've been a lifelong follower, not hugely committed, but my mother did teach Danny Blanchflower at one stage. You won't know who he is.
I know the name Danny Blanchflower.
There you go.
Yeah.
So anyway, North London until I went to university at the age of 17, and then about 35 years ago settled in Petersfield in Hampshire, which is a lovely sort of rural spot. An hour from London, an hour from each of Heathrow and Gatwick, which suits me well, as you'll perhaps discover later on, and out in the countryside within 10 minutes of our house. So it's a lovely place to be.
Brilliant. And family, you say us?
Yes, I married 40 years ago last year. So
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. And I don't know how that happened. Just one day at a time, I guess. Still more in love than we were when we started. And we have 2 lovely daughters who are 38 and 36, both married, and 1 granddaughter. So all good.
Excellent.
I seem to have a life full of women, actually. I mean, a wife and 2 daughters, and my father died young. So when my first son-in-law came along, I was absolutely delighted. Somebody who understood the offside rule and could see underneath the bonnet of a car without collapsing,
Yeah, he wasn't an Arsenal fan, was he?
No, he was a rugby player, a Cardiff rugby player. So he was kind of uncommitted when it came to soccer.
Oh, he was all right. He was approvable then.
That'll do, yeah. He passed the handshake test as well.
You'll have to tell us about that handshake test.
The handshake test, yes. Well, you can tell a lot by people about people from the way they shake hands. And so I had told my daughters that any potential lad that they brought home would have to pass the handshake test, but I didn't tell them the rules. And so they told their lads when they were about to bring some poor sap home, "I'm afraid my dad's gonna shake hands, but you've got to pass the test, and we can't tell you how to pass it." So the guys kind of came in fear and trembling, and some of them, went in too hard, and some of them gave up altogether. And so it's a bit. I can't give away the secret now.
Okay, fair enough. Maybe offline, I can use it for my daughters in the future.
Exactly.
So you said you grew up in London.
Not just London, in North London.
In North London. It does matter, does it? Okay.
Oh yeah.
That's me. Maybe in a country.
Don't go across the river, And we have multiple identities. I'm British, but I'm English. I'm English, but I'm a Southerner. I'm a Southerner, but I'm a Londoner. I'm a Londoner, but I'm a North Londoner. I'm a North Londoner, but I'm a Spurs supporter. And each of those kind of nested identities, means something significant in a particular context.
Yeah, we all have our tribes, don't we?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sometimes they cross, and sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
So you grew up in North London.
Absolutely.
So when you were growing up there, obviously, maybe we'll cover it a little bit in what the job of a risk doctor is. And obviously we talked about this. I'm not sure whether traditionally when I've talked to people on these, it's generally about how they got into project management and things like that. And obviously you're in the project management arena. But what did you want to be when you were running away or getting beaten up by those wonderful Arsenal supporters?
Well, an astronaut, of course. I mean, all boys wanted to. We just had the moon landing. Werner von Braun was my hero, that interesting German chap who escaped the Nazis and went to America.
Yeah.
And I was determined to be an astronaut. That was my goal.
So so it wasn't to be involved with project management at all?
With what? Who knew what project management was in those days? No, and it never has really been to be involved in project management. For me, the world of projects is incidental. It's a reasonable domain to play in, but it's not my only interest by any means.
Yeah, fair enough. So, as you grew up there in North London and moved on to university, you said when you were about 17. So, what was it? Was that to take you forwards to that astronaut, or did you move to a different direction then?
I'm afraid that never came off. So I had another option. I was a musician actually from the age of 10. I started to play the tuba, which was bigger than me, and that was quite an interesting experience too. And I won a scholarship for 5 years to Trinity College of Music in London, which is one of the main 5 Royal Colleges, studying big brass. So it was trombones and tubas. And when I came to 16, sort of age to choose A levels, I was interested in science and I was interested in music. And my careers teacher said, "How many successful tuba players are there in the country?" And I said, "Well, I guess about 3. "And how many successful scientists are there in the country?" And I said, "I don't know, but it's more than 3. And he said, "Well, if you follow music as a career, you'll be busking in the subways. If you follow science as a career, you'll never be out of work. So that's what you should do. And you can't do science as a hobby. You can do music as a hobby. So why don't you just be a scientist and leave your music as a hobby?" So I did that, and occasionally I've regretted it. I sometimes wonder if I know I would never have been the best tuba player in the world or the best trombonist, but it might have been fun to just take it a bit further. But when I went to university, it was to follow a degree in biochemistry.
Right. So, do you still play the tuba or the trombone?
Well, I don't. I have them in the loft, and now while I was at music college, I taught myself to play the piano because we had to do composition and harmony and counterpoint and all those sorts of things, which you can't really do on a tuba.
Right.
So I taught myself to play the piano, and after a while, I realized that was a lot more versatile than big brass instruments. So at the age of about 25, I transitioned into keyboards. This was the beginning of the days of synthesizers. And so now I play keyboard in various groupings of different sorts. And I still play a lot every week.
Oh, wow, cool.
Yeah.
So biochemistry. Tell me about that.
Well,
tell me about your degree in that.
Well, you'll discover as we go on that I seem to have done things in decades. So I had 10 years as a biochemist.
Yeah.
Do you want to know what the others were? I can give you.
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
My life so far in decades. I had about 10 years in biochemistry, then 10 years for a big defense contractor working as a risk management consultant, another 10 years with 2 small risk management consultancies, then another 10 years launching the Risk Doctor partnership, and then the last 5 years or so I've been trying to retire. And that will probably take me 10 years as well. So if you start at about the age of sort of 20 to 30 biochemistry, 30 to 40 with this company, 40 to 50 with the 2 smaller companies, 50 to 60 with the Risk Doctor partnership, and I'm now 64, halfway through my next decade of trying to retire.
Wow.
But biochemistry was fascinating. I specialized in protein chemistry. I did some interesting research that turned out to be the basis of genetic engineering. I was focusing on how proteins fold and unfold and how you control the shape of a protein in order to make it work. I developed a way of unfolding proteins that were wrongly shaped and putting them back together in the right order, and then went on to do the same sort of thing with proteins that control the expression of chromosomes, of genes. And so for about 5 years, I was an expert in the sorts of things that are now basic genetic engineering.
So
you didn't expect that, did you?
No, I didn't. Absolutely, you threw me completely.
That's
there.
where the doctor came from. My first doctorate is in biochemistry.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is that the doctorate, and it's kind of one of those things of you sit there thinking. I have a colleague who's a technical architect, and his degree was in biochemistry, and just hearing you talk about the biochemistry there reminded me of him, because one day we touched on it, and he started talking to me about was it about when you got salt going between cells? I can't remember what it's called. And he was describing that process to me, and it was like he kind of sounded like a different person talking about something else. It was really interesting.
Well, one of the things I've been very passionate and committed to the thing in front of me.
Yeah.
So I gave everything into biochemistry, into my research and my publications, and was completely committed to that as if it was going to be my life, and then it didn't turn out to be. But I did really enjoy it while I was doing it, and made a small difference. So that was good.
So how did that jump from the biochemist doctor working out how to make Dolly the sheep, jump from there to working with risks within a defence organisation? How was that? What was that transition?
Well, you see, my careers officer at school was wrong. And he said,
they wanted someone to play the tuba.
Yeah,
no?
yeah. He said, if you follow science, you'll never be out of work. And
right, that bit.
So I did 4 years as a postdoctoral research fellow at what was then Portsmouth Polytechnic in the biophysics department. And there was a rule in those days, this is the early 80s, that you could only have a position renewed twice in the same institution, because they wanted to spread the expertise around between different academic institutions. So after 2 renewals, you had to move to a different place.
Right.
And by that time, I was married. We had a couple of children. We settled our life in Petersfield, just 15 miles north of Portsmouth, and didn't want to move. So I could not continue. I couldn't work in Portsmouth anymore. I tried Southampton and Guildford and other places, and nothing worked out. And so I was out of work for 5 months. And then this job came up with a defence company that used to exist called Ferranti, which isn't there anymore, because they didn't manage their risks very well. And that's another story.
So tell us some more.
Well, I moved to Ferranti in, 93. And is that right? Yes, I think it was about 93. And around that time, just a little before that, the Ministry of Defence issued a requirement, an instruction to all defence contractors that they would use formal risk management on all future contracts. And the MOD had heard about this from the oil and gas sector and decided that it sounded interesting and useful. So they mandated it from the chief scientific advisor. And so we had to do it, and nobody knew what it was, including the MOD, actually. So my company looked around for some poor unemployed or person who wasn't doing so much, came across me and said, look, Hilson, go and find out what risk management is and do it. So that was great. And I got started following some of the folks in the oil and gas sector, some of the academics, got to know some people in the field, and developed an approach to risk management that we started using on one troubled project, which was spent twice the money, was 1.5 times late, and had no plan to completion. And so we applied this new risk management thing, and it worked, and we got the project through to complete under renegotiated terms. Everybody was very pleased. I got the job of spreading risk management through the company to all our projects, and then after a few years, and we got a small team around me. After a few years, I was asked to advise the board on strategic risk. And that's when the company made its biggest mistake, really, which was taking over an American company who had a lot of secret contracts with the Pentagon. So secret that they couldn't reveal any of the details to our due diligence team. And so we trusted them, went ahead, bought them for $1 million. And it all turned out to be a big fraud, and there was nothing. I spotted this. I asked the question. The chief exec said, "Don't worry, you're worrying about nothing. I've done this before." So I resigned. And 6 months later, the company was in such trouble that it went under, got sold to Marconi. Bits of it was sold to British Aerospace, and Ferranti doesn't exist anymore. The guys in the States, the directors of the company who we bought, went to prison for 20 years each. And it was a big story of unmanaged risk. But
Yeah.
as often happens, actually, the risk guys do see these things coming and pipe up, and are often not listened to. That's what happened with RBS and HBOS and some of those other bearings and so on. The risk people knew, and we said, and we weren't listened to. So
yeah, I suppose it's that there's a risk to here. Are you going to treat it right? And if some people just look at it and go, "Don't worry, we'll deal with that." It's that thing, isn't it? It's that, and that my sort of view of the likelihood ones and the scale things is
yes.
people sitting there going, "Well, it's not likely," but the scale of what that thing can be doesn't matter how likely it is. You've got to do something about it sometimes, haven't you?
Exactly.
Because it can, if it's, as you say, with something like that can take down a whole business. So, well, why would you take that risk without putting some controls in place?
That's right. Yeah.
So,
and I'm sure they did put, there was some due diligence. We had PricewaterhouseCoopers, and we sued them for our money back, and they gave us our money back, but it didn't give us our business back. So,
no, that's the thing. You can't getting fees back for paying someone is nothing compared to the reputational damage and the business damage that these things can make, is it?
Exactly.
So you said there that when you were asked to look at the risk stuff at Ferranti originally, was that you were already there and they were looking for someone to do that. So what were you doing there? Because again, it's kind of just trying to join those dots, because you were doing your biochemistry. Your role wasn't there. Obviously, a highly educated person, so going in different roles, it's understandable. It's just curious to know, what were you actually doing prior to doing that risk work within Ferranti?
I took on a job in the staff education team, which was the sort of internal training house.
All right.
And we had about 6 or 8 lecturers, and they offered me this job, or interviewed me for this job, and I said, look, I don't know the first thing about computer systems or defence or the Navy or any of this stuff. They said, yeah, but you know how to communicate, and you know how to take complex ideas and make them understandable. They said it's easier to find a good communicator and teach them about computers than to find a good engineer and teach them how to communicate. So I went in literally knowing nothing about the subject. After about 2 weeks of induction, I did my first 3-day training course for computer programmers. And it was a question of saying something in the morning, asking all the questions, getting all the questions asked. I said, oh, we'll cover that after lunch. Over lunch, going back to the office and saying, what's this, and doing all my sort of swatting up, getting some answers from the rest of the team, and going back and just blagging it, oh yes, of course I knew all about that anyway. And it was a great way for me to learn, actually. But I ended up being head of the staff education group.
Right.
And then from there, they took me on into this risk role.
Yeah, right. So it kind of stilled you for doing what you've done later on with that sort of a lot of your speaking engagements and education stuff as well, I suppose.
Yeah, yes. I always like to talk. Might have noticed.
No, not noticed at all. Not noticed. I've just seen that you've spoken a lot of places.
Yeah. But the risk thing was really just being in the right place at the right time, or it was purely by chance that this opportunity came along and they alighted on me as a suitable candidate, and I took to it and never looked back, really.
Cool.
So that was about 1980. Actually, I got my timing wrong. I must have gone to Ferranti at about 84, because this was about 86.
All right. So going into that and doing that risk sort of stuff is what a question I normally ask with the PMs is what their first project they remembered that they delivered, and quite often people are kind of going, well, I didn't realize it was a project, or I didn't realize I was managing it, kind of thing. But obviously with your kind of role, it was, when did you realize that you were or the first time you thought, hang on, this is involved with the project management industry? Obviously, you're doing the risk stuff. Was it in those first days of Ferranti and that first project you were talking about?
Yes, the one which was hugely troubled. And obviously, I had to work very closely with the project manager and the project management office. We had each major project had its own project office. And so the risk role sat within that. So I was more or less embedded into the project for, I guess, about 18 months, and saw project management, up close and personal.
Yeah.
It was very sort of old technology in those days, and we had a 2000 activity on arrow network that we printed out on huge rolls of A0 paper and wallpapered the project office with it in about 6-point print. So you need the magnifying glass to see it. And then we had to try and identify risks on this 2000 activity network and work out when things would finish, and the impact on the critical path and all that stuff, and earned value was part of it as well. So I began to see some of the interactions, the close interaction between risk management and projects. And when we actually managed to renegotiate a plan to completion and then stick to it, then I saw that the risk thing really worked. It really made a contribution.
So do you see risk management as a discipline within the project management arena, or do you see it as a complementary? Because obviously most of the PM box, the APM box, all of those, and we have a risk management section. But then I suppose we have a procurement management section, and procurement is a subset as well. Am I answering my own question there?
Well, I mean, I think yes and no. Clearly, risk management has a role within projects, but I think it has a role within everything that's important. So if you think about corporate strategy, or about running programs, or about innovation, research and development, if you think about sort of personal issues like managing your career, or bringing up a family, or investing for your pension, if you think about bigger issues like climate change, or demographics, or pandemics, or technological breakthrough, all of these things are affected by uncertainty. And so I see risk management as a life skill, which actually can be applied in pretty much any context where we have things that are uncertain and important, which is most things, or most things that matter. And so in the world of projects, the key is to recognize that risk is always and only defined in terms of objectives. And so one of my early sort of breakthroughs or insights was to come to a 3-word definition of risk, which has actually guided my thinking and practice for the last 30 odd years. And that's to say that risk is uncertainty that matters. So every risk is uncertain, but not all uncertainties are risks. So out of the billions of uncertainties in the world, which ones do we take account of? Do we need to prepare for and think about and respond to and report on? And we want to report on the uncertainties that matter, and we don't want to bother about the uncertainties that don't matter. And fortunately, out of billions of uncertainties in the world, most of them don't matter. So then how do you know what matters? And in the world of projects, what matters is achieving our objectives. So a risk is then defined as any uncertainty that, if it occurs, would affect achievement of project objectives. And once you've got that, then you can apply the same principle to anything. So what is a reputation risk? A reputation risk is any uncertainty that, if it occurs, will affect our reputation. Or a safety risk is any uncertainty that, if it occurs, would affect our safety performance. And a personal risk is any uncertainty that, if it occurs, would affect my personal objectives. So we can then get this kind of layered view of risk just from those 3 words. And then out of uncertainty that matters, you get the question, well, how big is a risk? And you've got 2 dimensions. How uncertain is it? And how much does it matter? And then we might talk about probability as a measure of uncertainty, and impact as a measure of how much it matters. Mm-hmm. So, all sorts of things came out of those 3 simple words. And it was one of my early insights, which has really shaped my thinking and writing from then on.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because one of the things that what you said there about risk across things is that we all manage risks all the time, don't we?
Of course, we wouldn't be here if we didn't.
Exactly, and that's the point, isn't it?
Crossing the road, and all those things. Yeah, health vaccinations, insurance, all that stuff.
Yeah, and you make assessments, but not necessarily with something about, right, how uncertain is this? How does it matter? And that's we do it subconsciously. I was listening to a conversation today about mathematics, and how the fact that everyone does complex mathematics all the time, but you just don't think about the fact that you're doing complex mathematics until someone says, right, we're going to do a complex mathematics problem. The analogy they had was a basketball player is doing some incredibly complicated mathematic calculations by throwing a ball into a net, but they don't realize they're doing it necessarily. And if you ask them to work out what they were doing on a piece of paper or a whiteboard, they wouldn't be able to do it. And I suppose it's the same with risk management that we do, as you say, every day as you're walking around or crossing the road.
Well, it is
making those judgments, aren't you?
But what was interesting when we started to introduce risk management into Ferranti, we had some really skilled project managers, and a lot of them said, look, I don't need a formal process or techniques or anything to identify risk. I do it all the time. It's just my day job is to think about what might happen and to stop the bad things happening or make them less bad or protect ourselves and to achieve my goals. And so, and they were right. They did do that and they were successful. And then the question is, how do we make everybody the same as the best project managers? We can't all have the same sort of level of experience or expertise or the same things happen to us. And the role of process is to capture the best practice of people who have done it before intuitively and make that available to everybody else. So what we're saying is, I say there are 6 questions that shape the risk management process, which any sensible person will ask. So what am I trying to achieve? What could affect me? Which are the big ones? What shall I do about it? When I did it work? And then what's changed? And that's just a natural set of questions. But if you think about it in a formal way, it becomes the risk process. So what am I trying to do? That's what am I trying to achieve is objective setting. Yeah. What might affect me? Identifying risks. Which are the big ones? Prioritization. What shall I do about it? Response planning. When I've implemented that, did it work? Risk reviews. And then what's changed? Risk updates. I mean, it's natural, normal. But what we do is we take the wisdom that's embedded in the old and bold people who have been doing it for years intuitively, and we bring that out and capture it in a process that anybody can follow. And then we all become as good as the best, not because we've had the years of experience, but because we're following a process that's based on their wisdom.
It makes me think about that is that, do you find that in organizations that you've been involved with where that application of a risk process, well, people will naturally be doing that risk management process you just described there as part of their project delivery, and then you place a process or a set of documentation or a set of forms or whatever, or a computer system or whatever around it, people then go, right, because I've filled that in, I've done my risk management. Do you see that happening?
Yes, there is a tendency to believe that once you've fed the system, you've done your job. Yeah, and of course, what you have to recognise is that risk isn't managed by computers or systems or processes. Risk is managed by people. Yeah. It's like, if you buy a copy of Microsoft Word, it doesn't make you an author. You could write a award-winning novel with Microsoft Word, but just because you've got it doesn't make you an author. And just because you've got some risk tool or some risk process, it doesn't mean you're managing risk. So what we're doing is using the process and the toolkit to facilitate the thinking process of answering those 6 questions. And facilitation, the Latin word facile or Italian word facile means easy. And so facilitation means making something easier than it would be without. So a facilitator makes the meeting easy. Yeah. A risk toolkit or a risk process facilitates the identification and management of risk. It makes it easier, but we still have to do it. And so just because you've got something in a risk register doesn't mean it's managed. You've got to do something about it.
And how do you get, do you think that's inexperience of the project managers? Is it inexperience of the organisation, the focus of organisations that you find that happens? Or is it a combination?
I think we're all too busy and we do things that are urgent instead of things that are important. And so, we've got to find a way of delegating or prioritizing so that the things that are urgent get done as well, but we don't miss out on the important things. And that, again, is where process can help. If you can't get through the next gateway without having done a proper risk assessment and presenting a reasoned explanation of how you're going to manage the risks in the next phase, then you don't get through the gateway.
Yeah, and the process becomes important then. Yeah.
And of course, you should be doing that anyway. So I think process is a useful backstop. It's like like my marriage contract. I don't know if I've ever read my marriage contract, but it's there if I need it. And you have to hope that you won't need it. You know, if after 40 years, we haven't ever referred to the vows that we made and said, well, you said, because, you know, we didn't need to. Some people do, of course. And then, you know, that's when they're in trouble. So the same, I think, is true, you know, of the process. It's there to remind us that we need to do things that we should want to do intuitively anyway.
Cool. That makes sense. Because I think it's an area that sometimes you can sit there and you've got that blank page in front of you. Go, right, I've got my project. What are my risks?
Well, you should be doing that on your own, really. You should be having your team involved. Getting multiple perspectives. That's where the process and the tools and techniques help to get you started. So you do a SWOT analysis that says, okay, we're good at this, we're bad at that. So what? What are the opportunities that come out of our strengths? What are the threats that come out of our weaknesses? And the technique begins to open things up for you. Or you do a root cause analysis, or you use a risk breakdown structure. And all these things are prompts or frameworks to help you think beyond the blank page.
Yeah, that makes sense. Makes sense. So moving from where you were, you've gone through your other, and obviously you went into that career as within Ferranti, you moved on. And from what you said, is that when you set up, you would set up risk consultancies and you were working with other risk consultancies?
Yeah, I started, I was poached by the risk consultancy that was advising me at Ferranti. So they said, you know, you're good at this, why don't you come and join us on the other side of the fence? And so I joined them for 5 years, became director of risk consulting. And then another company that I saw had a wider scope of interest than just defence projects and the defence industry. And they were working in pharmaceuticals and construction and IT and so on. And so I moved to them to broaden my experience outside of defence. I had 5 years with each. And that was really, really useful, just applying the basic principles that I'd learned in Ferranti in completely different settings. And then when I got to 2003, then I formed the Risk Doctor Partnership, which has been going ever since.
Yeah, because that's when I first heard of you, I think, when I was working with PMI. I think you were presenting at different places then and potentially advertising with the PMI UK chapter as well.
Yes, I one of the things I've done is spoken a lot at conferences just to get my ideas out and get them tested and get some feedback. And I've spoken at every PMI conference in the US and in Europe since 1999. So 99 was Philadelphia. And then I just went US, Europe until just about 3 years ago. So, you know, I speak at all those events.
Yeah, I thought that was definitely where I remember you. So you've got the Risk Doctor, you're out there, and what the Risk Doctor Partnership, is that your own Risk Doctor consulting organisation, or is it more focused on? Yeah, so it's similar sort of thing.
So I am the Risk Doctor. There is only one Risk Doctor, and that's me. But I have 24 people around the world who are equal sort of peers of mine in risk management and that sort of level of expertise and experience, all of whom I don't employ anybody. They're all associates, but they all have a successful track record of, you know, helping people manage risk in quite complex and difficult settings. So I've got 7 in Australia, a couple in China, 5 in South Africa, people in the States and Canada, and then throughout Europe. So yeah, 1 in India. So, you know, it's a small select group, and you can't join. You know, it has to be people that I know. You know, I get lots of people saying, well, how do I become a partner? And I said, the answer is, I'm sorry, you don't.
Yeah.
But when I say there's only one Risk Doctor, of course, that's not actually true. There are 2 others in the world. I don't suppose I should probably mention them on air because that might be weakening, diluting my brand.
Yes.
But there's a Risk Doctor in Chicago called Charlie Cottle, who is an options trader. And all he does is options trading. And he's very, very good at it, but he's not what I do. And we know about each other and we like each other and we talk to each other, but we don't compete. And then there's another Risk Doctor in Australia. His name's Cyril Jankoff, and he's a contracts and procurement specialist. And all he does is contract risk in project contracts. So again, you know, we know about each other. We've talked about how we interact and agreed that we don't actually compete. So there are these other two, but they're both very specialized. And so my Risk Doctor partnership, Risk Doctor offering is much broader and international, of course.
Yeah. There's always someone who likes the name. A good
That's a
name.
great name, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's a really good one.
It came about, I know you're going to ask me this, and if you aren't, where did it come from? I have a friend called Janice Preston in California who used to call me Dr. Doom. Yeah, exactly. I wasn't very flattered, actually. So this was before the Risk Doctor came along. And so, I went with it. It was a bit of fun. But then when I decided I wanted to start my own company, and I started the company 6 months, or actually 9 months before I started. So I had a shadow company, a shadow website, a shadow blogs, and so on. So that when we went live, there was a history there already.
Yeah.
And I was on holiday with my family in Sardinia, and we in Villa Simius, quite close to Cagliari. We were sitting around the pool, and I was talking to my wife and my two daughters about starting a new company. It was going to be risky. I didn't know where the money was coming from. Did they think it was a good idea, and so on. And we got to talking about names for the company. I didn't want David Hillson Associates or anything like that, which is a bit limiting. So I said, well, Janice calls me Dr. Doom, but I don't like that. So I thought maybe Dr. Risk. And my older daughter just immediately said, well, not Dr. Risk, Risk Doctor. And it just went click.
Yeah.
And all the lights went on, the sun shone and the birds went, and there I knew exactly then it was the right name. So the Risk Doctor name was born by the side of a swimming pool in Sardinia.
Yeah, that sounds like the perfect place for it to start.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, hopefully a wine or a bottle in hand as well.
Something like that, yes.
So you started up the Risk Doctor. You obviously just reading those awards has been a sort of a vast thing. You're very successful and a lot of demand on your time doing that. So if I kind of look back over that career and look at what you've done, what would you say is your biggest screw up?
The biggest screw up.
And more importantly, what did you learn from it?
Yes. I've worked in 55 different countries on every continent except the Antarctic, which is way too cold. And
it's a bit risky up there, is it?
Very, yeah. But I love culture and different cultures and different languages and food and music and all those things. And my first big client in the Middle East was a Lebanese company. I won't give you a lot of detail because I don't want to say who they were. Mm-hmm. But they're very big in a whole range of different countries throughout the Middle East. And we got to do, myself and some colleagues, really design their entire risk management process from scratch, starting with the board and going through to their project teams. So we trained about 1,000 people. We spent, worked with them for about 5 years. And we got to a point where myself and a colleague were working on a big project of theirs, and we gave them an indicative quote for some work. And it was just because we didn't know how the work was going to turn out. So when it came to it, the work was a lot more than we thought it was going to be. So we went back and just said, I'm very sorry, but the price is going to be 20% higher. And they objected. They said, no, well, you've promised and we've shaken hands and we've been out for dinner and, we know you and you're our friends and you can't change the price. And I made the wrong choice to say, I'm sorry, we've done the work. We're going to have to charge you this. I put the invoice in and never worked with them again. And it was just a question of completely misunderstanding the culture, that in the Middle East, business is based on relationship, and relationship is based on trust. And if you say something and you don't keep your promise, then you're not trustworthy and you can't be worked with. And, I was right, because we did do a lot more work and we could have and should have charged for it. But in the bigger context, it was a stupid thing to do because we lost a very lucrative client. And so that was probably my biggest screw up, not understanding or respecting the cultural drivers. And I learned a huge amount from that. It's not all about the money. It is all about the relationship, and different cultures have different ways of building relationship.
Yeah, it's all, like you said before, it's about the relationships, isn't it, in general, getting things done. If you've gone back to your contract, and fundamentally same sort of thing, if you've had to go back to your contract, something's gone wrong, isn't it?
And they paid, you know, but then they just never spoke to us again. And I knew, I kicked myself, you know, within a day of doing it, and I could just see the whole attitude changed instantly. And there was no second chances. I did apologize, of course, and I did go to a couple of meetings with senior managers since then, but after that, but you know, there was just no openness anymore, and I just ruined it. Such a shame.
Well, let's flip away from that. I don't want you dwelling on that, especially with the name of Dr. Doom as well, so dwell down too far onto that one. But thinking about all of your risk management, obviously you will have been training people, you will have been educating CEOs, CIOs, all these different people, and helping them with their businesses. What is your proudest moment, whether that be the proudest, I don't know, risk you've identified and solved a risk and avoided a risk, that it was so important, or whether it was more about the people side of it, whatever. What would you say is your proudest thing that made you feel full of pride?
Can I give you two?
Yeah.
One is a small one and the other's a big one. I was going to a meeting up in London, must be 10 or 11 years ago, rush hour, arrived at Euston tube station, and there's loads of people on the platform, and I was on the tube. The doors opened and I stepped out on the platform, and people kind of step back a little bit when you come out. From the back of the crowd, a voice said, "Good God, it's David Hillson." And I have no idea who it was. I didn't see it. They didn't approach me afterwards. I went to the meeting. I looked at no, there was nothing. I have no idea. But on a crowded London Underground platform, somebody recognised me, and I'm quite short. I'm only 5'6", you know, so I wasn't like towering above everybody else, and I wasn't the first off the train. I was quite proud of that. I dined out on that for quite a long time.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Maybe if in the unlikely event of my small listenership, that is that person who did shout that at David.
Yes, then
let me get in touch.
I'll take you out to dinner.
You'll have a whole host of people claiming to be there.
That's right. Yes. And then, more significantly, to understand the significance of the beginning of this story, you have to know that I have an American brother-in-law who's a bit of a trickster. So I was in Boots in Petersfield, and my mobile phone rang, and this American voice said, "Can I speak to the Risk Doctor?" And I said, "Who's calling?" He said, "This is the Deputy Director of NASA." And I thought of my brother-in-law, and I went, "Yeah, right." and this voice said, "This is the Deputy Director of NASA. Who am I speaking to?" And I said, "You want the Risk Doctor? Just a minute, I'll go and get him." Came back with a slightly different voice. "Hello, how can I help you?" And sure enough, it was the Deputy Director of NASA. And he said, "We've got this problem with the mission to Mars. And when you're next in Washington, would you come and visit us?" Well, as it happened, my sister and brother-in-law lived just south of Washington, D.C., so I was going to see them the next weekend. And I said, "Well, I'll be in Washington next weekend. You know, can we fix something up?" So I went over and went down to the Langley NASA base, which is in Virginia. And they got this issue with trying to build a base station on the moon as a kind of interim jump-off point for going to Mars. This is a project that was ultimately cancelled by Barack Obama, but at this stage it was very live. And so we had this the full-day workshop to try and solve this problem of how to build a base station on the moon. And obviously I'm a world expert in base stations on the moon, as you can tell.
You've seen Space 1999, haven't you?
That's it, yes, Joe 90, all of those things, definitely. Anyway, I applied my basic techniques and sort of approach to asking dumb questions and clever questions in alternating. And we started about 8 o'clock. We had a break at 11, and I said to the guy who called me in, "How's this going?" He said, "You've earned your money already." He said, "This is totally brilliant. We're really close to a solution." And by 1 o'clock, we'd solved the problem. We've worked out how they were going to build a base station on the moon, using techniques that I developed with GlaxoSmithKline in their vaccine research and development department to develop new vaccines. And I'd just taken this technique that I developed with them, applied it here in this aerospace, in this NASA setting, and it worked. And by 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, I was done. I'd done a day's work. I got $5,000 or something. NASA was happy, and I went away, and they carried on and did the job. And I was really proud of that. That they invited me in the first place. B, that I was able to be useful within 3 hours of arriving, and C, that it actually solved the problem.
That's fantastic. And obviously it hooks back to your maybe not being an astronaut, but very close to touching.
Oh, well, yes, that's the nearest I got, sadly. But
that's a lot closer than a lot of us, isn't it?
I've done Space Mountain in Disney World a couple of times.
Okay, fair enough. Similar, isn't it?
Yes.
That's brilliant. So, obviously, as I said before, I know of you from the speaking, from your writing and the blogging, and when you launched the Risk Doctor. What made you decide that you were going to do? Because obviously, working as a consulting organisation, you'd have obviously got within the industries had quite a bit of knowledge on how to market yourself anyway. But what made you go into the writing, or had that started before that? What made you blog, podcast, speaking, etc.? What was the driver behind those?
I've always felt that, I have ideas. I'm curious, and I think about things that other people perhaps haven't thought about, and ask the second and the third question. Don't just be satisfied with the first answer. And so I tend to kind of have ideas that turn out to be useful. I've got a few ideas that aren't very useful, but that's how you get useful ones, is by thinking of lots of other things along the way and sifting out the good ones. And I realized that I had more ideas than I could practically use myself. And so I developed a kind of pipeline approach to my good ideas. The first was to talk about them in conference presentations, to get people interested and aware that this idea was out there and was interesting and useful. And then when they came to ask me, I was the only person who knew how to do it. So that was quite a good sort of little boost to the business. And then after 2 or 3 years of exploiting that little bit of a lead on a new idea, and other people were beginning to hear about it and start to use it, and then I would train on it. And so I would then say, well, look, I know how to do it. You're interested. You'd like to do it. Let me show you. And then the third sort of leg of that was really to create a sort of legacy element, which would be either in writing or in videos, where I'd create something more permanent rather than just training the people who came on the courses, to say, well, look, if you want to know, here is a book or a couple of articles, or something somewhere that you can go and refer to, a video perhaps, which just gives you the detail that you need. So, and by the time, and with those 3 steps of being leading edge, of training others to come up behind, and then of making it available to everybody, I tried to keep a pipeline so that by the time I was writing the book on the first thing, I was leading edge on the next thing. And then by the time I was telling somebody else about how to do that thing, I was then ahead on the next thing. So I was trying to kind of keep that thought leadership, thinking and practice. And writing was really, and videos, a part of that whole sort of capturing the good ideas and making them available for other people. So apart from the books, everything I've done has been free. There's 120 Risk Doctor Briefings available in 7 different languages, just free on the website. There's 171 videos on the Risk Doctor Video YouTube channel, all free. Everything is there just to take away and use, because I've got more ideas than I can use myself. So I'm happy to give it away.
That's brilliant. So last few questions now, because I recognise we're knocking on towards the hour. What was the last risk book, project book, any book really that sort of like to do with your career that you read?
Well, of course, I'm writing books. So I've just finished the manuscript for my next book, which...
You're not allowed to say your own.
Well, I did read it. It's very good. When you write something and then 3 months later it comes back through the typesetting process, and you sit down and you think, oh, this is good. Who wrote this?
Yeah, because you've forgotten what you've written, and then
that's right.
Yeah, that's it. But absolutely no problem. There's plenty of time to plug at the end.
No. I don't need to do that. Why do buses come in threes? That's a great little book, which I come back to from time to time, which is a kind of an idiot's guide to statistics. Why do buses come in threes is an explanation of queuing theory. Why is Fridays the best time to buy a lottery ticket? When it's raining, where should you hold your umbrella to stay driest, and how fast should you walk? So some really interesting chapters on basic statistics, and I find it a lovely, joyous little book, which I love to read. Then perhaps a little more seriously, the Floor of Averages. Who's that by? Savage, I think his name is. The Floor of Averages again is a kind of a making. What I love is the idea of making complex concepts simple, and so some of those books I find just do that for me. And then I read a book called The Mists of Avalon during March, which is a fantasy book about King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, seen from the perspective of the women in the story. So Morgane and Guinevere and Elaine and some of those others, just really, really interesting, and trying to get a view of the clash of cultures in ancient Britain. Between the Romans, the Christians, the Druids, and the Celts. And so I read that really just as a bit of light entertainment, but for to get me thinking about different cultural perspectives.
They sound very interesting, all of those. That ancient Britain stuff, I've been reading a few things on that myself.
I love it.
What was the last podcast you listened to?
That was yours. So,
great choice. You've got such good taste.
I listened to your conversation with my friend Carl Pritchard, which I think came out.
It was Carl who actually said to me, "You should get David on."
I heard him say that. Yes, I was very impressed. I gave him $50 for that. So, Carl's very humble and very enthusiastic, and I love his work. And to just call himself the Risk guy. I mean, he is American, of course, but the contrast between the Risk guy and the Risk Doctor, it's we do the same kind of thing, but in different settings. And I just love the way he presents himself and the way he writes and so on. So I listened to your podcast. I think it was 45 minutes. It's just a joy to listen to Carl expressing himself.
Yeah, he was. It's expressive is the right way to describe him. It's fantastic. And what was the last blog you read?
I don't read blogs. I find that, apart from my own, of course, but they are very what's the word? Temporary. They're passing. There's very little in a blog where I think, oh, I want to just print that out and read it again, or save it on my computer and refer to it later. A lot of the blogs I read, I go, yeah, okay. So I'm not a great blog consumer, I'm afraid.
That's fair enough. So the final question I'm going to ask you is, and I'm trying to decide on what timeline to pick on here, but if you were able to talk to that younger self, David Hillson, actually probably when you were at Ferranti and you were doing the education stuff, and someone come to you and gone, right, let's do this risk stuff, what advice would you have given to yourself then, if you could talk to you now? Or what would you say?
I don't think I'd say anything, because I think authenticity and integrity is important, and not to try and bias your reaction. I mean, I said earlier on somewhere about wanting to be fully enthusiastic and committed to the thing that's in front of me. And I've always tried to do that. And so when I go to bed at night, I'm totally exhausted because I've given everything during the day. And when I die, I don't want to have anything left to give. I want to just stagger over the finishing line and think, that's it, I'm done. And so when I respond to those sorts of opportunities, I'm responding wholeheartedly with who I am, in the circumstances. And I think to say, oh, this is a great opportunity, make sure you follow it, or I wouldn't talk to that person. I think, you have to act, you have to be true to yourself and act in a way that comes naturally. And I don't think I'd want to kind of queer that by, or sort of spoil that, bias that by advice from the future. I'm happy just to go with it and the same's true, from now for the decisions that I'm making going forward. I'm happy to just make the best decision I can at the time and see what happens.
Brilliant. Well, that's the end of all my questions, David. It's been a pleasure talking to you. It's been inspiring and surprising as well. Some of the roots, certainly on the biochemistry and all those sort of things. And I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, I've enjoyed it very much, Nigel. Thanks very much. And I hope our listeners enjoy it too.
Yeah, I do hope so. And I'm sure they will. If people want to get in touch with you, want to check out some of the stuff, what's the best way to get in touch or check out what's going on?
The Risk Doctor website is the first place to come. It's risk-doctor.com. Nice and easy. Mm-hmm. There's a links page which has got lots of other things on it. Every page has a link to my YouTube channel, and that's the other place where a lot of the good stuff is. So that is the channel name is Risk Doctor Video, all one word. So the Risk Doctor Video YouTube channel, or if you just Google David Hillson, you'll find me.
Mm-hmm. Or a tube station.
Yeah, or Euston Tube Station. Yeah. Actually, I'm going to be at Waterloo on Thursday at about 8 o'clock this week. So I'll be listening out on that platform just to see, if I get that extra bit of affirmation.
The whole platform might shout at you. That would be
useful. Who knows? That'd be wicked.
Brilliant. Thank you very much again. And I'll let you get on with your evening. Have a fantastic evening.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very much.
I've enjoyed it too. Thanks, Nigel. Cheers.
Cheers, David. Well, it's goodbye from me, Nigel Creaser, and it's goodbye from him, the Sunday Lunch PM. Goodbye. Many thanks to David for that interview. If you know anyone who has an interest in take on project management, then get them to message me at sundaylunchpmpod@nigelcreaser.com. If you've got questions or queries or just want to say hi, get hold of me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc. It's Sunday Lunch PM is the handle usually used. And if you want to support the show, you can do it in loads of ways. The easiest and cheapest is share it with your friends and colleagues. Tell them how good it is. You could give me a 5-star review, whatever platform you're listening to. Grab a copy of the free Project Managers When I Were a Project Manager book. Links in the show notes, and give me a review for that. Or buy a copy of Project Management, the sketches, which would be fantastic. Obviously, that deal on the Kindle of $1.99 at the moment is a great time to get hold of one. Or you can pop along to Patreon, and we've got a giving site there where you can contribute for the price of a coffee, depending on what level you want to go at, and you can get some free copies of the books that way. But more importantly, come back next time, have a listen again. Really pleased that you guys are out there. And remember, #project management is funny.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.